The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. The introduction made a claim. This chapter begins to make the case. And it begins not in the lecture hall, but in ordinary speech, because the deformation we are after announces itself there before it ever reaches our theology. Listen to how people talk about God, and two phrases recur with remarkable regularity. I feel like God is. In my opinion, Jesus would. We say them gently, humbly even. They sound like the opposite of arrogance. But notice what the grammar is doing. In each, the self is the subject and God is the predicate. The measuring instrument is my feeling, my opinion, my settled sense of how things ought to be. We report on God much the way we report on a film we saw or a meal we ate, running him through our own palate. And we seldom suspect that the God so described might be one we assembled ourselves. I want to be careful here, because the point is not that feeling and opinion are wicked or that ordinary believers are uniquely foolish. The point is structural, and it is the burden of this whole book. We are remarkably good at making up religion. Not only pagans and cults and the people down the road with the strange ideas, but us straight out of Christianity with a Bible open on our laps. We gather a little from how we were raised, a little from the people we like, a little from our wounds, our politics, our schooling, the mood of the culture. And we quietly assemble a nous, a whole way of seeing God, and we name it Christian. From the inside, it is indistinguishable from faith. It feels like conviction because it is conviction. It simply may not be true. That is the uncomfortable place we have to start. A certain kind of reader, particularly one raised in the Anglo-American tradition of liberty, will feel his hackles rise right about here, and the reflexes will fire fast. I get to believe what I want. I'm entitled to my own opinion. That's just your opinion. Let's agree to disagree. Before I lay a finger on those sentences, let me honor what is true in them, because a great deal of it is true, and people bled to make it so. You really are free, and the freedom is not a concession, but a principle. John Locke had the heart of it. A belief compelled is not even a belief. It is an outward conformity laid over an unchanged mind. Such is the nature of the understanding, that it cannot be compelled to the belief of anything by outward force. Thomas Jefferson drew the civil consequence in a sentence as blunt as a fence post. My neighbor saying there are 20 gods or no God, neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. And so it lies wholly outside the magistrate's sword. One could push further still into the radical natural rights individualism of a Lysander Spooner, and the core would hold. No church, no state, no neighbor may reach into your skull and install a conviction by force. Hold on to that with both hands. This book has no interest in loosening that grip. But watch the quiet substitution that tends to follow. Being free to believe anything is not the same proposition as every belief being equally true. The first is a claim about rights. The second is a claim about reality, and the one does not entail the other. The right to your opinion protects you from coercion. It was never a warrant that the opinion corresponds to how things are. On a matter of genuine taste, coffee or tea, hymns or guitars, to each his own is exactly right, precisely because there is nothing there to be right about. But the mind of Christ is not a matter of taste. It is a matter of what is, in fact, the case about God. And about what is actually the case, you have yours, and I have mine quietly stops making sense, in the same way it would stop making sense applied to whether the bridge ahead will bear the weight of your car. Which brings us to the gentlest and most dangerous sentence of them all. Let's just agree to disagree. It wears the clothing of grace, and sometimes it is grace. But very often it is fatigue dressed as grace. For if two people genuinely disagree about the mind of Christ on some honest question, look hard at what is actually on the table. Either one of them has Christ's mind on the matter, and the other does not, or neither does. They cannot both be right. Agreeing to disagree does not dissolve that fact. It merely agrees to stop looking and send them both home, still holding what they walked in with, one of them, perhaps both, cradling a Christ of his own making. Unless this become a weapon, here where the edge is pointed. It is pointed at me first. I am every bit as able as anyone to be the one holding the counterfeit. Most able, in fact, on the days I am most certain I am not. The argument of this chapter is not, I am right and you are wrong. It is that the warm truce of we're both fine may be the single most efficient way to leave us both exactly as we were, each content with a Christ of his own manufacture, and neither ever meeting the real one. The Hebrew prophets understood this failure long before modern epistemology gave it a name, and Isaiah drew it in a portrait that is almost comic until one realizes it is a mirror. A man fells a tree. With half the timber he kindles a fire, warms himself, and roasts his meat. From the other half he carves a god, falls down before it, and prays, "Deliver me, for you are my God." Same Locke. And the prophet's devastating verdict is that the man cannot see it, that no one considers, nor is there knowledge or discernment to say, "Is there not a lie in my right hand?" The polemic is sharpened by something Isaiah's first hearers knew, and we have forgotten. In the ancient Near East, a cult image was not thought to become a god by human craft alone. It was animated through elaborate ritual, the Mesopotamian washing of the mouth and opening of the mouth, by which the artisan's handiwork was ceremonially disavowed and the statue declared to have been born in heaven, not made on earth. Isaiah's barb lands precisely on that disavowal. The man's whole religion depends on not noticing that the object of his worship came off his own workbench. He is not stupid. He is not even, by his own lights, doing anything wrong. He simply cannot tell that the thing he venerates is a thing he made. The lie is in his right hand, and he cannot feel its weight. This is the predicament the introduction stated abstractly, now given a face. Jeremiah states it without the picture. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? The Hebrew word for heart is not, as our word suggests, the seat of the emotions over against the intellect. It is the inner command center, the place where a person thinks, weighs, and decides, the nearest Old Testament equivalent to the Pauline nous. Jeremiah's claim, then, is not the sentimental one that our feelings sometimes mislead us. It is the far more unsettling one that the thinking faculty itself is bent, and therefore that the very instrument we would use to audit ourselves is the instrument in need of auditing. One cannot detect a counterfeit using the counterfeiter. So the question this book exists to answer can now be put with its full edge. How would you ever know the difference between the actual mind of Jesus and a Jesus you have quietly made up? If the forgery is from the inside, indistinguishable from the genuine article, then I feel like, and in my opinion, cannot be the test, for they are simply the forgery describing itself. Sincerity cannot be the test. The man with the log was sincere. And introspection cannot be the test, because looking inward only ever returns more of the self that is in question. We need something better than our own gut. And, as the next section and the next two movements will argue, there is something better. But to reach it we must make a second admission, and it is the more wonderful of the two. The counterfeit is intelligible only because there is an original. The startling claim at the center of the Christian confession is not merely that Jesus died for us, but that there once walked, in a particular body in a particular century, a fully human mind that saw God and the world rightly, completely, without distortion. The mind of Jesus of Nazareth. And the Gospels insist, with a candor later piety has often found embarrassing, that this mind was formed. Luke reports that the boy increased in wisdom and in stature. Hebrews, that the son learned obedience through what he suffered. Isaiah's servant says that the Lord wakens me morning by morning, wakens my ear to hear as those who are taught. He received his way of seeing day by day from his father and got it exactly right every time. This must be said with precision, because two errors crouch at the door. To confess a formed human mind in Jesus is not to deny that he is, without remainder, God the Son. But neither may we quietly evacuate his humanity for fear of it. And here the early church fought a decisive battle on our exact ground. When Apollinaris proposed that in Christ the divine Logos simply replaced the human rational mind, Gregory of Nazianzus answered with a principle that has governed Orthodox Christology ever since. That which he has not assumed, he has not healed. If the human mind is precisely what is deformed in us, then the human mind is precisely what the Son had to assume, inform, and get right if it is ever to be healed in us. The genuinely formed human mind of Christ is not a concession to be minimized. It is the hinge of our salvation. It is that mind Paul has the audacity to speak of as shareable. He writes the most outrageous sentence in his correspondence. We have the mind of Christ. And again, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. He is not urging us merely to agree with Jesus' opinions. He is claiming that the very way Jesus saw everything can be formed in another person, received as he received it from outside himself by the Spirit over time. We now have both admissions on the table. First, a fearsome human capacity to fabricate a mind that is not his and not to know it. Second, the promise of a real mind, his own, that can genuinely become ours. Between them stands the only question that finally matters. Which of the two is operating in me at this moment? And how could I possibly tell? The shape of the answer is forced by the shape of the disease, and we may state it briefly here because it governs the rest of the book. If the difficulty is that you cannot see your own counterfeit from within, then the remedy cannot be located within either. No quantity of soul-searching repairs a broken searcher. The help must come from outside the self, and not from a single outside source, which could itself be co-opted, but from three, so that they may correct one another. Those three, the Word read in its own world rather than mine, the Spirit who imparts the mind rather than echoing it, and the body whose many eyes catch what my single pair cannot, are the subject of movement too. They are three witnesses, not three mirrors. None is self-certifying in isolation. But where the Word in its native frame, the Spirit's gift, and the body's sight converge, one has a signal of a wholly different order from the closed circuit of one's own intuition. The discipline this requires, to hold oneself as probably wrong, and then deliberately to turn to something outside oneself to be corrected, is among the most unnatural and humbling acts a person can perform. It is almost exactly the difference between a child and an adult. The child is serenely certain of nearly everything, while the grown-up is the one who can be shown he is wrong and revise. This, incidentally, is the precise point at which the program of this book turns out to be the structural inverse of the Gnostic instinct, which counsels the seeker to look within, to awaken a knowledge already latent in the self. The Gospel's counsel is the opposite. The self is exactly what cannot be trusted, and the mind must be received from outside it. If the reader carries away a single diagnostic from this chapter, let be this. A Jesus who always agrees with you is almost certainly not Jesus. He is an invented Jesus functioning as a mirror. The real one will keep surprising you. A mind you have manufactured for yourself will, sooner or later, ratify everything you already wish to believe about your enemies, your comforts, your politics, your grudges. That congenial agreement is the tell. The actual mind of Christ, met in his own first-century world, yet the same Lord who meets the reader now, for he is the same yesterday and today and forever, will instead keep correcting you, pressing you toward conclusions you did not choose and frequently dislike. If your picture of Jesus never costs you anything, never moves you off a position, never makes you wince, be very careful. You may be warming your hands at one half of the log and bowing down to the other. The same mechanism operates socially, not only privately. We do not merely invent a Christ who agrees with us. We go in search of a room that will agree with us too. A great deal of what passes for looking for a church is the hunt for a tribe that already shares one settled opinions. And we love the tribe, the belonging, the chorus of amens, right up to the day it does its proper work and tells us we're wrong about something we did not wish to be wrong about, whereupon we take offense and decamp for a friendlier congregation. Paul saw it coming before there were congregations to compare, a time when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. A church one will tolerate only so long as it never contradicts is the very same mirror as a Jesus who always agrees, merely with a steeple on it. A fair objection arises here, and it deserves a straight answer. Is not your reconstructed biblical world simply one more thing you have made up? It could be, which is exactly why it is never left to stand alone. It is held under the Spirit and under the body, and checked against the New Testament's own record of how Jesus and the apostles read their scriptures. What results is not a certainty one manufactures. It is a gift one keeps receiving, in part, in company, always open to correction. The day one's picture of Christ can never be shown wrong is the day it has quietly become an idol, and we are back at Isaiah's workbench with a lie in the right hand. One matter remains, and it explains the architecture of everything that follows. If the goal were merely to acquire more facts about Jesus, we should open the Gospels and begin there. But that is not the goal. The goal is a mind formed to learn to see as Jesus saw, and he did not see the world through a stack of doctrines. He saw it through a story, the long account his father had been telling for 2 millennia. Adam and the garden, Noah and the flood, Abraham and the promise, Moses and the mountain, Israel and her infidelity, David and his throne. That was the world inside his mind, the field in which his thoughts grew. And when he wished to explain himself, he reached back into that, as it is written every time. So that is where this book goes. Not to add information, but to walk the same road his mind walked, in the same order, until we come round the last bend and arrive at him, and recognize the face. From Adam, all the way home to Jesus. We begin, though, where he would have us begin, on our knees, with an honest confession. I freely admit my human propensity to make up a mind of my own. I would rather have his. I want to know the real Jesus, not the one I have fashioned for myself in my head. That confession is not yet the cure, but it is the threshold of it, the first turning of the mind away from itself and toward what is given. The Old Testament calls precisely this disposition the beginning of wisdom. Everything that follows is the slow work of learning to pray it with our eyes open.